Welcome everyone to today's webinar. As the title would suggest, we're going to be discussing now that we are remote, and for the most part successfully remote over the last year or so, what should we be doing with our infrastructure that remains on premises? So a little introduction to myself. I'm Mark Beder. I'm the Global Director of Solutions Architecture at iland. I run our Solutions Architecture practice. And some of the things we'll be covering today include the market forces. In other words, what are the trends we're seeing, what's happening in general in the space. We'll then cover some considerations of moving to the cloud, some things to keep in mind, some things to be aware of, and then we'll finish off with iland's approach to infrastructure as a service, which is one of our cloud offerings. So let's dive in. Now, as the numerous headlines that you can see on the slide would suggest, there's certainly a trend behind consolidating office space. It might be reducing the office space. It might be getting rid of it altogether. Now, there was a survey completed of UK mid-market size organizations, and that mid-market definition was annual recurring revenue of between 15 million and £1 billion. So fairly wide range, but nonetheless, a few hundred organizations as part of that survey. And the majority of those organizations expected to reduce their office space by about 25 to 30%. Now, yes, that would indicate there's still going to be a need for a physical location, but in saying that, it's going to change. There's likely to be an increase in hot desking. Some employees will likely be remote maybe 50 to 75% of the time, if not full-time. And with those changing locations and those changing working environments, when you have your infrastructure on premises, that needs to change to accommodate that. For instance, if half your employees are away from the office all the time, do you need all the infrastructure that's in the building? Is it actually as secure if perhaps most of the technical staff are never there, or people aren't in the building enough to make sure that it's properly attended to? So these are just some of the things to take into consideration about physical locations. In addition to the changing workplace, there's a few other things that are happening at the moment. The pandemic has driven a significant push for cost reduction. Now, closing down an office could be that strategy for cost reduction, and some iland customers are doing that. They're doing just that. They've seen how they've been successful in remote working over the past year, and they no longer see a need or value in having an office where everyone comes together. In fact, in some cases with some of our customers we've spoken with, they've actually seen an increase in productivity by having everyone remote as opposed to being in an office. So that taken into consideration, there's this push for cost reduction. And this is not particular to any one geography or any one country. This is a global trend. And there's certainly an uptick in that desire to drive cost savings and cost reduction, or rather savings and cost reduction, compared to pre-pandemic. And then the final thing to take into consideration is, we have this reducing footprint from an office perspective. We have this drive for cost saving, but in contrast to those two activities, we have a significant growth in cloud. These numbers are as up to date as November 2020. So you can see, as of November 2020, the spend on cloud is over $250 billion. It's expected to reach 305 billion in 2021. And specifically when we talk about infrastructure as a service, because that's one of the main topics we'll cover today, that consistently year over year is about 20% or so of the total cloud spending. If you're wondering where the rest of that cloud spending comes from, software as a service, things like Microsoft 365, Salesforce, etc., and platform as a service typically account for about 60% each year. But those numbers continue to go up in a linear fashion. So each year, even though the overall cloud spend keeps going up, software as a service and platform as a service account for circa 60%, and infrastructure as a service is about 20%. So those are some of the forces. And you might be wondering, well, why is this move to cloud accelerating? What's the value that it's actually going to deliver? So one of the reasons behind that move to cloud and that push, and that rapid growth in the value of that market is the desire to get out of the data center. Now, this could be equally get out of having infrastructure on premises in your offices. They can be synonymous. And you can see there's a significant number of organizations that are looking to do this. Having infrastructure on premises or in a data center that you manage and control is a significant overhead. You've got to maintain the site, you've got to maintain the infrastructure within that site. You need skilled resources to carry out those activities. So hence such a big proportion of organizations are looking to eliminate the data center. Another area where we're seeing companies push to the cloud, or another driver at least, is that transformation to software as a service. This is that move to things like Microsoft 365 and other subscription-based services, which free up the organization to focus on other aspects. If you think about specifically Microsoft 365, that move to a subscription model takes away the need to manage an email system, manage file sharing systems, manage internal collaboration systems, and many more. So there's a significant value in consuming software as a service. And then the last thing really, and this is kind of a summary of some of the benefits of moving to the cloud and why organizations are looking to do it. In other words, that first one about eliminate the data center, why they're looking to do that, and software as a service, is this infrastructure challenge. So when it comes to infrastructure, you have a scenario where as organizations grow, they consume more and more of it. There's more and more storage, there's more and more compute. Achieving the SLAs that businesses need associated to that become prohibitively expensive, exponentially expensive. In other words, going from 99.5% availability SLA to 99.9, or 99.9 to 4 nines. Those jumps, whilst they might seem small, are exponentially more expensive than the previous solution. So to deliver a 99.5 might cost, call it 1,000 for the sake of this argument, but to deliver a 99.9 is suddenly 10,000, and to deliver a 4.9 is suddenly 100,000. And that is seen widely across organizations that attempt to deliver that. Then there's the other aspects around the ability to deliver into new markets, so geographic delivery or dispersion of your infrastructure into other geographies to better deliver services. And there are numerous others. But the main thing that's important to keep in mind is, as per the graphic on the right-hand side, is your infrastructure, the hardware, the compute, all those CapEx items, they don't add business value. If you acquire a new server or some new storage or a newer network, they don't necessarily bring in additional revenue. They're necessary because they have to keep the business running. But if and equally, when something fails within those and then it's fixed because it has to be fixed, it doesn't change the organization. It's not going to suddenly open up a new revenue stream. It's not going to necessarily differentiate you from your competition. But they're things that just have to happen. A colleague I used to work with used to refer to as plumbing. You need it. It's not necessarily going to make you stand out, though. So these are some of the things that we see. These are some of the realities we're facing nowadays. And it's evident that people are looking to the cloud. But as part of that cloud adoption, and we see, we saw the numbers in terms of the spend, we saw some of the reasons why. We're just going to, this is just reinforcing all that messaging and some of the other values associated to it. So cost reduction, changing your commercial model from CapEx to OpEx, having flexibility, being able to deliver in new geographies. These are all things we're seeing time and time again. However, one thing that is not always taken into consideration and is in contradiction to the drive to save money, the cost reduction initiatives, is sometimes if you enter the cloud without taking all the necessary considerations into account, it can actually cost you more. And there was recently a survey done on what are organizations focusing on? Have they moved to the cloud? And if they have done so, what are their cloud initiatives? Because they've already made the move. And so we see, the main culprits when we talk about cloud in terms of the percentage of the market that's consuming those platforms. But look at what the number one initiative for cloud in 2020 was: cost saving. And so we're going to dive into this a little bit more. But one of the things that comes up time and time again is cloud, in theory, will support those cost saving initiatives, but the reality is often very different because various factors and considerations haven't been taken into account. So at iland, aside from the platform, which we'll cover in a little bit, because I did say at the start we'll talk about iland infrastructure as a service. One of the things we do is we like to think of cloud as a bit of an economic discussion. And to that point, there's a bit of a framework which we believe should be adopted when you are embarking on that move to cloud. Because the reality is, cloud is not an if, it's a when. And even more so, it's a why haven't you started already, as we've seen from the market forces. So it's important to understand why you want to make that move to the cloud. Moving to the cloud for the sake of it or because everyone else is doing it is not a reason. So it's important to understand what you're aiming to achieve with that move to cloud. Is it flexibility? Is it opening up new markets? Is it releasing internal resources to focus on other initiatives? They're numerous, but it's really important to understand why you're making that move and what you're hoping to achieve from it. The next element to take into consideration is lowest price doesn't equal lowest cost. And it sounds simple, but if we think about that previous slide where we saw that the number one initiative for cloud in 2020 was to drive cost savings, surely moving to the cloud achieves that, but it doesn't. So you have to take into consideration all the elements of the overall solution, not just the sticker price, as it's often referred to. A carpentry expression, but it applies to cloud time and time again. Measure twice, cut once. In other words, understand your end-to-end. Understand how you're going to achieve that solution, not just that headline number which makes it seem more cost effective. Take the time to ensure what you're getting is what you need at the price point you're expecting. And then another element is cloud infrastructure matters. And what we mean by this is not all clouds are created equal. And it's an important consideration because at the face value, what each cloud platform is delivering seems the same, but they're not necessarily the same. The underlying engine of that cloud, the compute, the hardware, the technologies that are being delivered as part of that cloud platform are not always the same. Where does this leave us? Here we are. We now need to take into consideration we've got a shrinking on-premises infrastructure. Our employees are no longer tied to a physical location. The market is changing. The world is changing. Cloud is everywhere. So what do we have to do? What should we be thinking about? We have our offices which are disappearing. And we could go to a data center, and that's what we mean by primary site, if you're not already there. We could consume a general purpose cloud, and by general purpose, we're referring to your AWSs, your Azures, your Googles of this world. Or we could look at a cloud provider like iland. And what should we be even taking into consideration as part of that decision process? To the point of what we've discovered already, it's you have to take everything into consideration. You have to look at the bigger picture, and what looks the cheapest doesn't necessarily mean it is the cheapest. So to help with this, what we've done is we've created a formula for success. And let's just look through at some of those success criteria as part of that formula. Now, these are all things which we believe are essential to have a fully functional cloud platform that can deliver for business requirements. Now, you would argue that none of this necessarily should be a surprise, and it should be taken as a given that you're going to get these things if you move to the cloud, that you'll have performant compute, that you'll have options around where in the world you deploy it, that it will be secure, that the SLAs can be achieved, those 99.9 or 4 nines, etc. And that it will work with your environment the way it has, so that you're not going to have to do a complete rework of your environment. And that's what's really we're talking about from the compatibility standpoint. And then ultimately, you'll be supported along the way. No one wants to make a move into something new and just be thrown into the deep end without any assistance. So fairly self-explanatory, but we'll just step through and highlight as to how some of these things can actually be missing depending on the choice you make. So let's look at primary site. And again, primary site is potentially building your own cloud in a data center or consuming a cloud service from a local provider that has built that. But there's some limitations there. So first off, that compute isn't necessarily capable. And what do we mean by that? Yes, day one when you build it, it might be completely capable because it's been specified as per the needs today. But what about 6 months? What about a year? What about 2 years from now? Can that compute flex? Can your requirements be accommodated as you grow or change? And more often than not, the answer is no, because those platforms, if you're taking it from a local provider that's built it, they are running that infrastructure on a model where they've acquired the asset and they need to run the asset for a period of time. If you've built it yourself, again, you've acquired an asset at a point in time when your business needed X, but in the future you need Y. So unless you spend more, that infrastructure is not going to change. Is it flexible? Well, again, if you're looking at a local provider that's delivering it to you from their own facility, you have no geographic diversity. That is their facility. It's quite likely smaller local providers don't operate across the globe. And then when you think about the customized VM sizing and pricing, well, because it's acquired and delivered directly to you, those models are not fully customizable. So you're kind of locked in there because the infrastructure supports what you need, and then that's it. Security, again, now providers may offer layers of security, or you yourself may build in layers of security, but will you have everything? Will there be something missing? Depends on the budget that's available. On the resiliency aspect, if it's a single site, so we talk about primary site, we talk about a data center, how do you protect it? How do you add resilience in terms of having a secondary site? Can you replicate what you run in that site to another? Is that natively built into the platform? The compatibility piece, sure, that might be there. It could run on the hypervisor you need. You will know the configuration. There's no changes necessary to the way you run things. And then finally, on the support, will you get all those services? Will they have an internal compliance team? Will you have all the expertise to build it? Especially if you're doing it yourself and you think about finding a data center facility and building your own cloud. Do you have the expertise to build that? So these are things to keep in mind. You could argue some of these things are not necessarily a red X, but it will vary from one provider to another or one organization to another, but just food for thought. Let's look at cloud, general purpose. So how is this any different? Well, we know that the compute is highly capable. in your AWSs and Azures of this world with hundreds of different options, from really low-level compute requirements to high-performance compute. So there's no concern there. However, what's important to note is that when it comes to the general purpose clouds, if you have the need to co-locate particular hardware, you might have what's known as a black box solution, something provided by a vendor that takes up a rack or takes up half a rack and needs to physically go somewhere. You can't move that into the general purpose cloud. You might have some networking requirements or some hardware specific to your telephony or connectivity options. Again, unless you can virtualize that, you can't stick that into the general purpose cloud. And then the reason we've put a red X against the customized VM option is because general purpose clouds force you down an instance sizing route. Think of it like t-shirt sizes, and they don't always fit. On the security thing, again, there are a lot of security offerings in those platforms, but they often incur additional costs. They're not necessarily built in, and therefore drive that spend in public cloud, which is important because you're making that move to cloud to drive cost savings. So if your spend is going up, are you actually achieving what you need? The resiliency aspect, again, a lot of these general purpose clouds do not offer integrated replication. There'll be options to make your data resilient and maybe have it another copy somewhere else, but it's not your environment. It might be just the data. It's not connectivity for your end users and your network, etc. And then hence the point about the end user connectivity. There's a lot of manual work needed and expertise required to ensure that you have that resiliency when you start consuming general purpose cloud. The compatibility piece, let's just say that those platforms are very different and often require elements of rework. It's seldom are you able to achieve a very simplistic lift and shift from where you are today to those. There's often consultancy work required, which can come at a great cost to get you from A to B. And then the support is another element. The supports are additional charges, and more often than not, you need to rely on third-party service providers to plug that support gap because those platforms are very different. So let's cover off iland. It may come as no surprise to see that we don't have any X's along this graph, and you might chuckle at that, but we strongly believe this. We strongly believe that when we say that we don't see any barriers across all these towers, that we're being 100% honest and transparent. We do have integrated backups. We do run a VMware platform. The sizing of your workloads is completely customizable. The compute platform is constantly maintained and updated on a regular basis. Numerous layers of security are built into the platform at no additional charge. We have flexibility on being able to co-locate your environment. We run as a global cloud service provider with 10 regions across the globe. We have multiple forms of connectivity available, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So hence, we don't see any of these being a barrier in terms of consuming the cloud. So really, and one of the points we wanted to touch on, because we talked about the cost savings, we talked about the considerations. In general, we feel that the move to infrastructure as a service with iland is ultimately just a more economic approach. And so we have a really simple example here of, yes, you could do your own thing on one of the major hyperscalers. But when you do that, you have to think about all the different pieces of the puzzle. You've got to think about the security. You've got to think about bandwidth charges. What about backup? And this is really more in relation to that concept of understanding your full costs. Don't just look at, well, a VM there will cost me X and that's all I'm going to pay. There's other pieces that you have to take into consideration. On the iland side, we feel it's a much simpler solution to build those things in for you, to give you all the elements you need, and a really simple purchasing model. How much compute do you need? CPU and RAM. How much storage do you need? And then if you want backup, how much backup do you need? That's it. There's no bandwidth charges. There's no additional licensing you have to take into consideration. Everything is built into the platform for you. So with that, let's just quickly do a little recap of the iland cloud platform as we come towards the end here. As mentioned on a previous slide, we operate from 10 global regions. We've been doing cloud and DR specifically for about half the time we've been in business. Our platform delivers 100% availability SLA, and that is credit-backed SLA. We're not putting that up without any teeth. It's important to understand that we feel very strongly and confidently about our ability to deliver that. And you don't just have to take our word for it. We've been recognized by our partners and industry analysts for a number of years, year after year, and we will continue to strive to deliver the best possible cloud experience in a simplistic model that's easy to consume, as opposed to some of the other cloud providers out there, which quite frankly make it quite complex and difficult to consume. So one of the things we'd encourage you to do is give us a trial. Try it out. Head to that link, sign up, have a play, log on, see how it works for you, see how easy it is to use, how intuitive the platform is, and equally performant the platform is for yourselves. You don't have to take our word for it. Last thing, for everyone who's attended today, we'll be giving away a £100 Ticketmaster voucher. The winners will be notified by email, but for us, we think it's really important of showing support for this industry that's been so hard hit over the past year or so by COVID. Please, if there's any questions, drop them into the Q&A. We can address those. But encourage any thoughts and feedback that you have. So I'll just leave us on there for a moment, and we'll take any questions you might have. But with that, thank you very much for attending, and take care.